Live. Hi, everybody. It's so exciting to be here with you in this healing conversation. And I want to, of course, introduce my wonderful colleague, Carolyn Myss, who we've been explaining to the people on this call who are on our Zoom that we've been trying to meet for about a decade and following each other's work, and we've never been able to do so. So this is the first time we're actually meeting and having this kind of a conversation. So it's been really fabulous. And I'm going to just introduce, I mean, if you don't know Carolyn, and everybody knows Carolyn Myss, she is a New York Times bestselling author who is, like me, started out life as a journalist and then got sort of worked into, I guess, I like to think I got hijacked into spirituality. So I think she's done, so many amazing classic books on spirituality, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And if you don't know me, maybe some of Carolyn's followers don't, I'm Lynne Mctaggart. I am a best-selling author as well, and I have a number of books that try to meld science and spirituality. And as I say, it's so interesting because we both have this journalistic background, this writer's background, and also have taken this foray into spirituality. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is the mystical experience, because I know Carolyn has had all of these extraordinary mystical experiences, and as have I. And I think we have interesting differences and similarities in that Carolyn's has been a journey of the individual, and mine have been a journey of the small group. And so I think that's what we really want to talk about is, what is this? Let's start talking about it. Maybe Carolyn, let's just talk about, how did you get into all of this?
Oh, you know what? I think, and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hello. Thank you for joining us. And what a pleasure to be with you, Lynn. I, you know, I, I don't remember ever making a choice to get into all this. I think I followed the path that was most intriguing to me. And it was as simple as that. Nothing fascinated me more than the unexplainable nature of the divine in our lives. I was fascinated by when I'm just going to say it, when I was a child, I was fascinated by these stories of people who were compelled to live extreme lives for spiritual reasons, for mystical reasons. And I would think, what in the world did they experience that caused them to live in a cave all their lives and be okay with that? They're not crazy. They're not crazy. And honestly, and then there were, the Catholic tradition has this history of apparitions. So I became intrigued with that, because I thought the Madonna has an MO. She always picks children as a rule, and they're always uneducated. And she always leaves miracles. Fatima, Lourdes, she leaves water. She leaves a holy place where people can go. It doesn't matter the religion. It's not, heaven does not have a religion. Let me just say that. There is no such thing as religion in heaven. If we could live by that on earth, we'd be much better off. But the cosmos is a religion-free zone. And if people can only get that, how free they would be, how free their souls would be. And if you want to understand the mystical realm, it's the shedding of anything that binds you to the earth in that kind of thing, that kind of ownership of God. Nobody owns God. Nobody owns God. No tradition owns God. You can have a tradition, and that's fine, and enjoy it. But do not think you can travel off the earth with your tradition, because you cannot. And so I just became intrigued with, obviously, heaven is always on the earth. And I couldn't take my eyes off it. I couldn't take my eyes. It just, nothing was as interesting. And when I was a child, it spoke to me, and there it is. The rest is history.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I followed a similar path in the sense that I was always interested in some sort of spirituality. I was always looking at the far reaches of various things, whether it was astrology or whether it was some sort of spirituality. I read many books on spirituality. I practiced, I was an early TM meditator, all of those things. But I really didn't, I got fascinated by it, but more hijacked, I think, because I started trying to figure out why spiritual healing works. And I started that out in the early 90s because we have a magazine, then a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And we study the medical literature and look at what works and what doesn't. And I kept coming across very good studies of spiritual healing. And I kept thinking, you know, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, this undermines everything we think about how the world works, how healing works. And so I set out to find that. And I thought it was going to be a fairly easy task, just talking to some, you know, frontier consciousness, you know, physicists and scientists studying consciousness, and that I'd write it up and that would be that. And it didn't happen that way. I ended up talking to a bunch of scientists, and I realized they were on the brink of a completely new understanding of the world, a new science. And so that got me into looking at the field, which is a quantum energy field. And there was such a spiritual dimension to that, but also the idea that thoughts are an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So being a journalist, still in my heart, I wanted to test it. And that for your listeners led me to do a thing called the intention experiment, which is working with scientists to set up consciousness experiments that require all of my readers or audience to send an intention to some well-controlled target. Anything from seeds, trying to make them grow faster, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn areas, to trying to heal somebody. Because I was really interested in what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time. So we've run 35 of them to date. 31 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects with scientists in a lot of giant universities and prestigious universities. But here comes the hijacking. I tried to scale this down in a small group, thinking it would just be a very mild feel-good effect. And we started seeing healings, just extraordinary healings. And this was strange to me, really strange to me, and almost unknowable, because it wasn't anything I had gone into. I know, Carolyn, you are a medical intuitive. I mean, that you have that gift. For me, it was just something that I just got blindsided by. I was just, you know, it was a miracle that came right in my face and forced me to look at it.
A miracle meaning what?
People getting instantly better. I mean, we put people into groups of 8, have them send healing intent, or thereabouts, have them send healing intention to a member of the group. So the whole group is sending intention, the same intention to that person. And as I say, I expected they would have mild feel-good effects. It would be like getting a bit of, you know, like your back massage. But first time we did it, and this was outside of Chicago, we had a woman who was suffering from depression and came in the next day feeling like her depression lifted. We had somebody else with arthritis who walked in normally the next day. Somebody with cataracts who was 80% better. And I'll, you know, and on it went. I mean, a recent one we did, we had a woman canceled her knee surgery. She could barely walk on it. Another woman who couldn't focus her eyes after stroke and immediately was able to focus. Somebody else had a dislocated arm and it slotted back into place. This is one 10-minute group intention. And this is what happens over and over again. I mean, there's a lot of other things that happen when people meet regularly in a group, but an immediate miracle. And so this is really what I want to explore is why. And I know you've done loads of work.
Why do you call it intention and not prayer?
Because I suppose because it's secular. And it's about a focused thought, and it takes away just what you talked about before. It takes away that that ownership. You know, when you call it by a certain religion, people have a particular religion, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or whatever, and you take away that charge, so that people don't feel necessarily alienated because it's not their religion. So I guess it is, but by any means, it is a secular form of prayer, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get why you wouldn't say it's prayer, because it is. I mean, intention is, I don't get why people are afraid to call grace what it is.
I think I think there's also another point to it, which is sometimes the sense of prayer is thy will be done, you decide. And here people are putting out a very specific request to the universe. And so I think there's some aspect of empowerment in not calling it prayer. But there is also a sense of grace. This is what is so fascinating about this group experience. There is a mystical state that occurs. And that's really what I want to explore with you, is because you're no stranger to a mystical state. And I want to find out really, what are the entry points there? Now, what do you find? How do you get into a mystical state?
I don't know that you get into a mystical state, but I guess the entry into what mysticism is the experience of the power of God versus talking about God. And part of the blockage is the cautionary approach of saying, for example, well, we need a secular vocabulary so we can wall off. We can wall off and the nature of God. So we'll keep the vocabulary secular. And we'll keep it scientific. And so we are acknowledging what Buddha would call illusion. Because that is, and what humans what humans are doing at that point is they're trying to control the power relationship of God, the nature of God, the mystical content of the divine. Thy will be done, for example. And thy will be done even means, if you give me a healing, I will deal with all that means. In my experience with healings, I am not surprised that people experience healings in a group because they have the group to verify and validate.
Mm-hmm.
A profound healing for an individual is another journey entirely. And what a group shares is a collective ego. we're part of this group, and we can validate what is happening to each other. And it takes an enormous amount of inner self-esteem to experience something that nobody else experiences and have to stand in that experience all by yourself. So if you, in a mystical experience, your interior, you shift from one condition of health to another in a very rapid way, but you shift by yourself. And like if you ended up at the Council of Miracles in Rome, and they said, how did this happen? And you had to explain it. The amount of self-esteem you'd have to stand in an experience that you cannot prove, you cannot validate, that only exists within yourself, and you don't have 7 other people, requires faith, requires a phenomenal amount of faith. So you're into mystical territory. You're into that territory of it's you and me, God. It's you and me. And when that kind of transition happens, that person oftentimes confronts a tsunami of doubters. Because, and as I've seen it, I've been that myself. The mystical journey is best, is earned. That's my word. It's earned. And it is earned, I think, by prayer and by allowing what Buddha would say, the illusionary world to break down.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens, I find, in a group is a kind of similar experience, but as you say, it's supported. What we've found, and this was the extraordinary thing about witnessing these groups, and I've not only witnessed groups, thousands of them, but run many year-long courses where we're actually walking people through it and monitoring what's going on with them. And as you say, the group is supportive, but that support, in my experience, can also be the entry point for a mystical experience.
Yes.
And that is, and I think it's about, because I think what you're talking about, Carolyn, too, is this, the losing of the ego is a really important element. And something about this group experience creates that, so that we found this out actually looking at what was going on in people's brains during Power of 8 groups. And that's what we came to call them. Only because, really, again, by accident, I was just talking with my husband about how we were going to run these things. And I said, when we first started it, and I said, well, I don't know, I'll put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And he, being also a journalist, said, I love it, the Power of 8. So that became the name of it, but you don't need 8. You can have 5, you can have 12, it still works. But what we found was something about the group experience allows people to shed that individual ego, that individuality, full stop. So when we started looking at this through neuroscientists, we worked with Life University, which is the largest and most prestigious chiropractic university in the world. And they had a team of neuroscientists look at Power of 8 groups, and they found a very rapid lowering of the parts of the brain that make us feel separate. The parietal lobes, they sit right back here, and they tell us how to navigate through space. They were turned way down. In fact, every area of brain, every brainwave category was dialed way down. Very different from meditation studies, much, much more similar to studies of Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer, Sufi masters during chanting, that kind of ecstatic experience, mystical experience. And for me, looking at that and also trying to document what people were telling me afterward, we had many conversations of people with and many surveys of people saying, you know, I felt extraordinary electricity through me, you know, the physical changes, but also feelings of extraordinary transcendent oneness. So, and in many instances, there were discussions and descriptions of spirit. One woman said it was like there were light beings behind us, and they were the magnifiers. And that's very, very common. There's many, many descriptions of that. So in trying to understand what goes on here and why people heal from a mystical experience, that's really my fascination. And I'd love to hear what you feel when you see an individual. I mean, you have this wonderful new book out about conversations with the divine and intimate conversations with the divine. What do you think is it, if you have any kind of sense of where somebody has to get to in order to have that kind of intimate conversation and have that mystical experience by themselves?
Well, first of all, I want to say my book was originally, I wanted to call it The Power of Holy Language. And I love listening to you describe your groups, because it brings to mind that teaching, where two or more are gathered in my name, there is God.
Yep.
And I think we've lost our capacity to see the presence of the divine within our lives, because we've taken the vocabulary out, Lynn. So we've used a much more cerebral vocabulary, and we talk about the neurology and all this, which is fine. But for some old school mystic like me, I look at, with no surprise, when two or more are gathered in any form to assist each other, and they invoke the presence of grace, not energy. I don't use the word energies for ordinary mortals. The word grace is what you're using. Energy has no connection with the sacred. Grace does. So if you're going to use it, use the right vocabulary in the major leagues. You are invoking grace. And grace has the authority to animate within the transformation into healing. And you know, I do rosary circles. And it's the same. I encourage people to say the rosary or say their prayer beads. Just pray at 3:00 every day for all those who need prayers. And what I think your circle of 8, which is so spectacular, and it's a Mobius, 8's Mobius, so that it naturally magnifies grace coming in and going out. And I do really think that when someone uses holy language and recognizes we're gathering in grace, that's it. Stop using scientific language because we feel safer with that. Call it what it is. This is a circle of grace. And we are invoking that grace on behalf of each other. That's power, Mctaggart. Own it.
Oh, I do. Don't worry. Don't worry. I do.
And truly,
So
yes.
science helps Western mind that needs proof. And science validates. I started out the intention experiment, remember, from the point of view of a skeptic, saying, okay, we're talking about the law of attraction. We hear all this stuff from the movie The Secret. You know, the journalist in me wanted to say, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about something really minor, like, you know, shifting a quantum particle, or are we talking about, you know, curing cancer with our thoughts? And what happens when lots of people are gathering together at the same time? Does it magnify it? So that's why the intention experiment started. And what it is doing is validating our inner power, the power that we've all had, and you know about more than anybody, but that has been essentially eliminated by our current scientific story, you know, the Newtonian, Darwinian story that we live by. So I started out looking at that. And as I say, the power of eight just came about by accident. And suddenly it was, wow, yes, these groups are healing. And you will love this. You will love this. I wanted to try to find some antecedents for these kinds of groups. Now, most groups, and there's plenty of prayer groups in indigenous practice, in various religions, but they require, you know, there's minions in Judaism, etc. But it usually requires some sort of leader shaman. However, as you said, I went back and found from a Baptist minister, I think, was talking about some sort of Protestant minister wrote in the early part of the 20th century that there had been a mistranslation in the Bible, in the King James Version. And it in the Acts, it was talking about the Acts where it was about Jesus's instructions to the apostles in how to form the church and how to spread his teaching. And he always said, you must pray. And with the King James Version, it says, with one accord, which is a fairly anemic way of saying what it was in the Hellenic Greek, which was, I think the term was homothumedon, which means passionately and with one voice. It's a musical term. So it's much more like, say, a Beethoven symphony than you know, with one accord. And when I looked through the Acts, it was always, as you say, the two or more are gathered. He was always saying to the apostles, pray together as one, and you will heal and you will be healed. And so that was the antecedent, you know, I could find that was closest to what I was witnessing.
Well,
and I think that's it.
I think we don't have time to go into it in terms of if you want it in terms of science, but you know, I really have found my way into what I'd call healing mysticism, prayer, the power of prayer, almost to the point where I want to scream at everybody. If you only understood how powerful this is, you would have your prayer discipline, like Teresa of Avila would say, never mind what's going on we have the great power, we have prayer. Because I was a medical intuitive, because of it, and not my background in theology, but when I started doing readings, I didn't know there were chakras. I didn't know any of this stuff. And as I began to intuit the bio-spiritual organization of the body, the way the delicate relationship between every thought having a creative authority, every emotion, every spark, and our way that we send off psychic free radicals into the universe and how they have creative authority, that in fact, this is the microcosm of ourselves, that we are a bio-spiritual ecological system unto ourselves, that is what we are. We're a micro earth that operates on the laws of nature, just like the macro earth. We are little micro earths. And this, the more I saw why people don't heal, Then I pursued, how can people heal? What is the power? Why are we afraid of becoming whole? Why are we afraid of becoming whole beings? Why are we afraid of sensing the emotional, biospiritual, energetic content of another human being? Why are we afraid of being able to intuit what another person needs? Why are we so afraid of empowering another person, which is the greatest challenge of all? Because that's the greatest obstacle. We will stay in one world of power because the great transition is how to become a vessel of service instead of taking, how to become a vessel of service. Thy will be done. You tell me what to do with this gift of power you have given me. And that's what that prayer means. It doesn't mean do what you want with me. It means you've given me so much. Every thought creates something. This is so much power. I'm returning it to you. I'm surrendering this to you. Tell me what you want me to do with this, because I can sense this world and it is speaking to me. And you are all of this. This is all you. That's what I'm getting. And this time that we're living in, we are transitioning from that blindness that it's all about us to finally getting what is in one is in the whole, which is a bio-spiritual, ecological, mystical truth so huge that it's transforming every particle in this world. We will never live long enough to see this happen, but we are living. We are at the shores of this transformation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the issues here is essentially reclaiming what we already have. I mean, one of the concerns I have are the constant suggestion that we aren't enough as human beings, that we need AI, that we need we need human upgrades. In fact, there is a book called The Great Reset, which is essentially about that, the fact that we need something more in order to heal, in order to advance. And as you say, I mean, this is something that cannot be replicated by any machine. We have so much power. We have particularly so much power to heal. I've seen it, as I say, thousands of times. Something I'm going to pick up on something you said that I think is so important, which is this whole thing of being of service. One thing that I have seen over and over again about healing and mysticism is essentially getting off of yourself. When people in these groups, there are people who get healed and there are people who get stuck. And I constantly come up against people who aren't getting anywhere. They're doing their power of 8 things. They're doing intention. They're doing prayer, all sorts of things. And they're not getting anywhere. And oftentimes I will finally say to them, well, get off of yourself. Why don't you intend for someone else and see what happens? And 9 times out of 10, that is the thing that also shifts their life too. So there's 2 points I wanted to really make. One is the extraordinary power that I've seen demonstrated not only in the field, but also demonstrated in the lab. And they are, of course, our ability to affect, the ability of our minds to affect the physical world and each other, that we have enormous power to heal the world, to heal each other. And we also have psychic ability. We have the ability to see beyond our senses. We have all kinds of things like that people cannot, that no sophisticated equipment can possibly replicate. And so it's very important, as you say, in this moment where we've hit a well, we've hit a bifurcation. You know, we can continue to go down the same road that we've always traveled, and it's going to lead to a complete breakdown of everything, and we're about there. Or we can take a hugely different path, and that is going to have to be a mystical and spiritual path. It's going to have to be a different, completely different path that isn't all about me getting and accumulating, but about something really different.
Mhm. Well, I think in this transition, I think in entering the nuclear age, we've entered a time that necessitates a shift in our resources, and that our intellectual resources are not enough. They're insufficient. We need our soul resources now. We need them. We've entered a time, for the first time in the history of humanity, where our instincts have fallen off the rails. We've always been driven by the desire and the need to create and the need to survive. And for the first time, we've created something, the capacity to destroy ourselves. And we can't outcreate that. Nuclear power is here. Nuclear weaponry is here. And that we have lived, and we've adjusted to it to the point where we don't get up every morning thinking, oh my God, we can destroy ourselves. We're actually mutating to where that has become a kind of dark thought form that is very active in our collective field. And we kind of live with this dark thought form and we adjust to it, but we're not adjusting, we're mutating. And it has caused an extraordinary mutation that is partly being offset by the fact the only way we can outrun this destruction is by becoming a species incapable of using this weaponry. We can't create anything that can undo it. We have to become something awakened so that we would never use it. We would never destroy our own home. What kind of species destroys its own home and thinks that's an accomplishment and celebrates it as if that's an accomplishment? But that's what kind of primates we are. You know, I mean, we're primates and we have to actually get that. And that's how base we are, Lynn. We are not advanced. We are not anything. We're still base creatures that have to kind of sharing is still an excruciatingly painful thing for people. So let's lower the bar here, sweetheart. And really deal with, I can't go lofty and like this without putting my feet on the ground and really dealing with what's out there. I just don't go into high space without getting my feet on the ground. I'm sorry, girlfriend. That's not how I do things. Because looking at the world,
Yeah.
get its feet on the ground and pay attention to what's really out there. And that every day we are actually facing racism, ethnic issues, the fear of people are afraid of each other because of the package they came in. So no, these are the real issues that are not just groupated away or meditated away. We've got some hardcore, serious, badass issues of humanity facing us.
We do. And you know what? I'm convinced that small groups and even big groups of, call it prayer, call it intention, do that kind of allow that heart to expand and leap across the fence. For instance, I did an experiment a couple of years ago, and I had really great technology, which was almost like a giant Zoom, where I was speaking from a studio, and we had cameras in 9 locations. 8 of them were in Arab cities, in conference rooms, where we had participants from that Arab city. So we had collections of people from 9 different Arab locations, and then the 10th one was an audience of Israeli Jews. And I got them together to do an intention to lower violence in Jerusalem. And there was some evidence that the crime rate went down, the violence levels went down a bit, but that wasn't the interesting part of the story. The interesting part of what was going on between the Arabs and the Jews. Now, to set this up, the Jews and the Arabs were barely even speaking to each other. And most of them actually had never really known any of the other, essentially. After this intention prayer, they started sending love to each other. They started saying, your God is my God. I love you, brother and sister, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was a total love fest. And I've seen that. I did a similar one for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, where I had Arabs and I had Americans doing intention for 2 provinces in southern Afghanistan, and found the same phenomenon. And when I tried to work out why, I looked at some evidence from the University of California at Berkeley, and they showed that when there is this kind of philanthropic involvement, they had 2 groups of students. One batch were shown photos of starving kids. The other batch were shown photos of people like them or the people they would become. This was students at the University of California, Berkeley, and they showed doctors, lawyers, bank managers, or fellow students. And they found that the people who had done the compassionate viewing were far more likely afterward to identify with people not like them. And it all had to do with the activation of the vagus nerve, if you want to look at all of the scientific element of it. And this was fascinating to me because I saw the same phenomenon going on with these groups. And let's call it prayer then, but getting people together who are these polarized individuals and having them do something like this together can be a fast track to connection. They talk about so many complex ways of trying to get these groups together. We're even trying a big intention experiment in December 20th, where we're going to have Zoom groups of police, African Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and see what happens. Have them come together and see if they start connecting after doing this prayer together. So I don't know. That was my explanation of it, but I'd be interested in yours.
Well, I think here's what's true. Anytime you get people to step out of hostility, you're going to have a positive response. Anytime you get, and anytime you introduce the role of the holy witness, where you get one side to listen to the other side, and both sides listen, and they serve as holy witnesses, where each side is not trying to one-up them in terms of wounds and pain, but rather just listen to that's the sacredness of the holy witness. People want their journey and their experiences to be witnessed. And if that can be done in an atmosphere of respect, then some level of transformation is ignited. And this is a way of a first step in softening this idea that you want my power and I will not give you my power. I will violently keep you from my power. You know, I did a series this year called The Phoenix, because in a question about the COVID virus and when that came up, and all that was happening, the madness politically in this country, and in fact in your country, and all of this, you know, I said, actually, the whole world has been braced for something happening for a long time. Some catastrophic thing happening for a long time. It shouldn't surprise us that something was going to happen. So I took an archetypal approach that, in fact, the groundwork has been laid since the 1960s. If you understand how to interpret the archetypal footprints in the cosmos, that from the 60s through the 70s through the 80s, there has been this archetypal movement and energetic signals that have been kind of coming together for this time that is cataclysmic. And I don't mean cataclysmic in the sense of Armageddon. I don't do that, but rather some energetics had to come together to boost us from one way of thinking that finally cracks through this continuum of narcissism and ways of thinking that get us past talking about becoming global and community and actually having to lay the groundwork for it. Because we've done a lot of talking, but we haven't actually progressed past the internet and becoming global. We've done comfort zone global, but now we have to actually, the virus to me is this really kind of divine phenomenon that is a global crisis that is not political, doesn't have any political consequences, involves us all, and has the message of healing, which is exactly what we're talking about. It has the message of healing. And that is something I don't think we should overlook, that in this catastrophic time, the cosmos is saying, heal together. Heal, all of you. Heal.
Yeah, yes. And in fact, I mean, I think what I've found is during this time, when people were forced to be so isolated, one thing that has really helped has been little healing circles, little power of 8 circles, because you can meet online the way we do it now, where you can meet on Zoom, and many groups do. And certainly the groups I run a year-long Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, and we put people into groups for a year, and they meet virtually, and they become their intention family. They're essentially sacred family, but they never actually physically meet. And I think that what we're really talking about now is community. And I think that is going to be a community, whether it is global community or whether we're talking about small community. And that is such an important movement forward, essential movement forward. I mean, I was fascinated. Book before last was a book called The Bond that I did. And I wanted to, the book was really trying to, it was an answer to Darwin, and it was an answer to Darwinian thinking of survival of the fittest. Were we made to be so competitive was my question. And the answer was, was resoundingly no. I mean, the evidence pointed over and over again to the fact that we were never meant to be alone, that belonging is possibly one of the most important things in the human spirit. We need to belong. We need to connect. And that is on several levels, of course, both spiritually and in a, a community. So we're talking about that really as a movement forward, the idea of not living for this extraordinary competitive individualism, which has been the mantra by which we have, lived for this time. So let's start. I'm just thinking about, I'm aware of the time. Let's start taking some questions from people, shall we? Let's have a look, because we've got loads of people on here, and we've got, okay, so, all right, from Michelle, for you, Carolyn, what do you feel is the greatest challenge for people these days for their health and spiritual development?
Faith. And I'm going to say that faith to me is like an epidemic crisis. And it's not just faith in God. Most people can tell me with great clarity what they don't have faith in, but they can't tell me what they do have faith in. And a crisis of faith spreads because it always tells me that they don't have faith in themselves, that they know that they can't give their word and keep it, that they have no trust in themselves, much less in their family, much less in their friends, much less that they don't know what it is to say to themselves, you know what, I'm going to walk 3 blocks every day and start building myself. And now, and every part of them knows, no, you're not, that they can't even keep their word to themselves. And if that's their experience with faith in themselves, then how would they expect to have faith in a relationship? How would they ever grow to trust a deep friend when they don't have faith in their own gut instincts? So how would they hear God? So how would they trust anything? And they don't listen to their conscience, never mind consciousness. That's not a word I like. I like the word conscience. They don't even listen to that inner metronome that says, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is not. So faith is the core. Grace. Faith is the core. And I write about that in Intimate Conversations with God. I mean, I write about these graces because with every prayer, I include a description of a grace, because people need to really refresh what they know about grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And now somebody else said, in your healing experiences, this is for me, have you considered the energetic protocols based on the laws of subtle energetics that must be in place for any findings to be just? And she's basically saying, what protocols did you put in place to safeguard external subtle energy influences? Well, you're going to be surprised by this, Michelle, because we don't find we need it. I know this is a thinking all the time with healing, that you've got to create some sort of psychic bubble so that you won't be harmed by external influences. It's been our experience that, number one, you remember we're doing healing in a group all the time. And the group experience is a great protector. But also some of the things that I teach in my Intention Masterclass and other courses of mine is about not having that kind of sense of a barrier. If we are all one, if we are connected, if we are, part of this giant quantum field, why do you want to barricade yourself off? So what I found is more effective than a barrier is a acknowledgement and sense of your own purpose on earth. When people really hold on to their own divine purpose, that is essentially a bulletproof vest. And I find that is very powerful. I also find the group experience is very powerful in being protective.
Mhm.
Let's see what else you've got to ask. Okay. Who do we pray to, Carolyn? Is it the higher consciousness of ourselves?
Oh, hell no. No. Would you pray to your higher consciousness, for God's sake? That's what you pray, No. There is a holy force. There is a divine. It's not an off-planet, white-haired being. There's no thing that lives there. Everything is, in all mystical experiences, the person experiences being surrounded by light, being just enmeshed in light. Light is everywhere. And if you can imagine yourself walking around in all light, but you can't see it, and that you are breathing divine light, that you are living in light, that this is all light, that you are in fact in the nature of God at all times. You are in the divine. You are in the divine. And we are, if it was a tall, think of it like this. Think of mist everywhere, everywhere. And mist eventually drops into becoming rain and then water, and then we're individual ice cubes. And when you're an ice cube, you're frozen in time and space. So you can't reach and can't see the mist. But that's what a lifetime is. A little frozen ice cube in time and space from all this eternal mist, but the mist is still all around you. We're just at a different temperature. And so we can't see that mist because we're densified. It's like ultraviolet light. We can't see it, but it's here. And so when you pray, that's why I wrote this book. I wrote the book because you need to just talk to the divine as if the divine was everywhere. And that's what I do. I just talk to the divine. I'll just say, I'm having a hell of a bad day here. And I would appreciate a little grace action because I'm about to lose my temper. It's not a good thing. So get over here because I'm falling into an illusion. I converse with God. I converse, and that's it. And then I ask for grace all the time because I slip all the time, but I also know that every choice I make has consequences and creative consequences. I know every thought has an impact, but I prefer to think in terms of grace, that either I grace a moment or I do not. And if I don't, I hold myself accountable. Why did I not grace this moment? When I'm with people, I think this day of my life will never come again. So tell me, what do you want me to do with this grace? What do you want me to do with this gift of my life? And I ask you all, get up in the morning and say to God, what do you want me to do with this day that you've given me that will never come again? That's how you pray. That's how you pray. And when you walk around that day in your life, you don't look at anything like, this is terrible. Don't curse your life. Just say, well, this is curious. Watch your vocabulary. Introduce holy vocabulary. It's not energy, it's grace. And everybody is trying as hard as you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And that is a really interesting point too about feeling what you said about feeling grace. Because somebody has asked me, so how do you know that you're having a mystical state? And what does it feel like? What does it feel like? Now, I can tell you how many of my students talk about it. There were people like Abraham Maslow, the famous psychologist, who defined what a mystical experience is. And he talked about it having different elements. There was a great change in the body, lots of energetics. And these are, of course, essentially he's simplifying, because people have different mystical experiences, but lots of energy running through the body, big bodily changes, a huge sense of oneness, an overwhelming feeling of oneness, oftentimes a kind of blinding epiphany of meaning. You suddenly, everything makes sense. Rejuvenation, that you change your whole view of the world, you make new decisions going forward, things like that. But it's so individual. I mean, the people that are part of these small groups talk about a group experience oftentimes, where they all have an extraordinary, similar type of imagery in their heads. They have a very similar experience. I'll give you one wonderful example. Recently, one of the Power of Eight groups in my current course that's going on, they had one member outside the group who was a friend of the group members, who was in the line of fire for the California fires. Her house was, right in the path. And so they all did an intention for her house to be spared. And when they did this group healing and group intention for her, they all had, or a number of them had, a similar image of a dome surrounding the house. So they all had this. They didn't discuss it beforehand. They didn't decide to do this, but that was what spontaneously happened in essentially this group mind. And lo and behold, the fire stopped across the street. And there was a circle around her house, essentially, that they found afterward. That was the circle where the fire had spared her house, and there was no ash inside the house. So the point I'm making is not just the miracle of her house being saved, but the fact that this was like a group experience. It became one group mystical state, and I hear that a lot. So I think maybe the short answer is a mystical experience is an experience that is an experience of the ineffable, an experience of God, as Carolyn would put it, an experience that, that is going to change you forever. And that is what happens oftentimes with these groups. And I think maybe it is just that extraordinary sense of oneness. If I were to say one thing that really moves people, that becomes the healing entity, it is that feeling of oneness. And I suppose it is that feeling of God.
I would agree with that.
Okay, let's see. What's the quickest prayer answered that you've experienced, Carolyn?
Oh, my.
That literally blew your mind, says Andrea.
Oh, so many. Well, I remember one time my mother said, well, why don't you write to this one person? And this one person was, associated with God. And I said, I don't have that address. Where am I supposed to get that address? I mean, I woke up in the morning and it had been faxed to me out of nowhere. And I hadn't even told anybody that I was looking for this particular address. And when I was writing, Entering the Castle, I said in a prayer, as I was coming to the close of the book, I said, Teresa, because Teresa of Avila, I said, I wonder what you look like. And then I went into this. I don't want an apparition. Don't pull any of that heaven stuff with me. I said, don't do that. I said, but I do wonder what you look like. 15 minutes later, my doorbell rings and I get a FedEx package. And it's a poster of a painting that this woman did. How she got my address, I don't know. No one knew I was writing Entering the Castle. And she said, and Teresa of Avila, of course, who lived in the late 1500s, by the time she was 52, they knew she was going to be a saint. So they decided they had to preserve her image, as they put it, preserve her image. So a portrait painter was sent to her convent to paint her. And after he finished the painting, the only image of her, and she hadn't seen herself since she was a beautiful 17-year-old girl. And so he said, "Mother, how do you think I look?" And she said, "Old," and walked away. You know, how do you, but anyway, it's the only known image. This painter did a beautiful oil painting based on that painting, and then sent me, she had posters made of it, and said, "I don't know why, but I think you'd love, I wanted to share with you this poster of Teresa of Avila." And there it was, a copy of what she did look like. 15 minutes. I mean, I have all kinds of these little crazy little stories of my conversations about, well, figure this out and help me out, and doorbells ring and that kind of thing. But I think that's kind of like holy synchronicity, because one of the things about prayers and having holy wavelengths is that you said you started out as a skeptic and you wanted to. I was never a skeptic. I never experienced that. Not once in my life, not one day, not 1 hour, not 1 minute. I have no idea what that is, and I don't want to know. I simply grew up in not just faith, but it was beyond that. It was the assumption that I was always companioned and always watched over and heard and listened to, and it was so intimate. It was never not intimate. And I used to think when I was younger, when I was, and I would see these when I was a kid, and I would, observe people, and I knew I knew that their worries and their troubles and everything else, looking at adults, and I would think, I could never live like you. I could never be someone looking for proof. I could never waste my time looking for proof. What is that? Why can't you see? Why can't you see? What are you looking for? What are you looking for? And what would be enough? What would finally be enough when it was so obvious to me? So I live in the world of the invisibly obvious. And I grew up in that world. I was raised by that world. I was raised by that world. And I've remained devoted to that world ever since.
I understand that, but most people don't. And so hence the intention experiment is, I don't need any convincing. I had a woman last summer who got up out of her wheelchair after one 10-minute Power of 8 group. I've had thousands of people like that.
What do you tell someone who doesn't get out of their wheelchair, Lynn?
Sorry?
What do you tell someone who doesn't get out of their wheelchair?
I tell them that maybe they didn't, maybe it wasn't their time. Maybe they need to change the way they're doing it. Most of the time, what I tell people is, well, don't do an intention for yourself. Get off of yourself and do an intention for someone else. See what happens. And that oftentimes is the thing that helps. This is why group prayer, group intention is so important, because sometimes it's about you, but most of the time it's not about you. And that becomes healing too. I have as many healing stories among senders as receivers, because the ultimate thing is, I think, getting off of yourself. And we talked about life of service. Well, that is exactly what getting off of yourself is. But, I have many, many stories. A guy who was depressed. He had been through the Vietnam War, and by the time I got to meet him, he was essentially had given up. He felt like, well, what's the use? His the love of his life died. You know, his life did not go according to plan. This was a guy who'd wanted to be a doctor, and just everything went wrong for him. He was part of a group, and he was going to put himself forward to be the subject, but the woman who was in the group as well, had cancer, and he felt she was more deserving. So he was part of that group, and an extraordinary change happened to him. He had, by any experience and by any measure, a mystical experience, a total transformational experience. And his depression lifted, his life completely altered. And he is one of many where the sending, it doesn't matter essentially what the object is. I think it is that experience in your language and terminology, when two or more are gathered, in mine, a power of eight group. It's when you are together and you get off of your concerns, your essential self-involvement, and you feel like you are part of something bigger. You are in a state of oneness, and that is where miracles happen.
Well, if I may add something before I think it's probably time we're going to start taking the plane down for this. But you're talking about miracles and healing, and next week I'm doing a reflections class, and it's on prayer and my book, but every day is going to be devoted to prayers of a certain type, and one day it's going to be on healing, and one day it's because it's the holy season, and one it's going to be in the presence of God in your life, and so it's going to be up on my website in a couple of days, but it is next week, and it's called Through the Firewall. And I would encourage people, because at the end of every class, I do healing prayer for them.
Okay, great. So, and the name of it, and where can they find out about it, Carolyn?
They can find it on my website, myss.com. And I'm finishing the write-up for it today, but it's called Through the Firewall, and it will be up on my website shortly.
Fantastic. And your book, and for people who don't know about it, tell us the name of the book again.
Here's the book. It's called Intimate Conversations with the Divine, Prayer, Guidance, and Grace.
Great.
And it's my prayers. So, and then with every prayer, I write a little bit of guidance and then something on grace.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. And I should let everybody know that my Power of Eight Intention Masterclass is kicking off February 6th. We've opened the doors for it. I do one of these for a year, and only one a year. And it is we have 6 consecutive sessions. You have live and interactive with me, and then I put you into groups. And we have follow-up calls, we have tips, advice, etc., and we monitor your progress. So if you want to find out more about that, you can find that on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, and just check under courses. It's the Power of Eight Intention Masterclass 2021. And it'll give you lots of information about exactly what the course entails, how the groups happen. We put people into groups in their time zone. And as I say, we get involved in monitoring you, helping you, and we've had some pretty extraordinary situations. So it's been so great spending time with you, and
wonderful.
Different languages too, I think, Carolyn. I think that's what's so fascinating about this. We do talk in a different language, but we're basically saying the same thing.
Absolutely. And it's good. It's like, I'm the mystical brain, you're the scientific, but we meet in the middle.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And people should know too, what's so interesting is we both had the same editor for a number of years, book editor. And so another connection, which has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's been so great spending time with you.
Holiday season.
You too.
Everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you very much. Check out Myss.com, LynneMctaggart.com. Find out what we're up to.
It was
Take
wonderful.
care now. Thank you. Bye.